I think it's relatively safe to say that the last few years have been monumental for both manga and anime alike. It feels like shonen as a whole is evolving, with a lot of new gen manga breaking the mold and trying something new. Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, Blue Lock, Hell's Paradise, Undead Unluck, Gachiakuta, and more. Among all these titles, there's a series I've had my eye on for quite a while that seem to be under the radar of quite a lot of manga readers, and honestly not talked about anywhere near enough, and that series is DanDaDan. It feels like it hits all the targets necessary in order to be extremely popular. It's packed with action, handles comedy and romance extremely well, and it's weird. Really fucking weird. Its absurdity and spontaneousness are a very welcome surprise, as well as arguably some of its strongest assets. In the first chapter, we're introduced to the two driving forces and protagonists of the story, Okarun and Momo. We first see Momo as she's being broken up with by her boyfriend, and based off of the interactions with her friend, we learn that the reason she dated her ex was because he looked like Ken Takakura. Already we're predisposed to believe that Momo just seems like a shallow high school girl, but what we see next subverts our assumptions. Momo sees the other protagonist, Okarun, being bullied in a classroom, and at a first glance we see an extremely scrawny and quiet guy unable to defend himself. Momo puts herself between the bullies and Okarun to protect him, which is something I wasn't expecting to see given what I had read earlier, and it's at this point where the story really and truly begins. Okarun is of the belief that UFOs and aliens really do exist and provides meaningful information and reasoning as to why he has this belief, whereas Momo is of the belief that UFOs don't exist and things like spirits and yokai do exist, while providing anecdotal information compared to facts. Already the author has seamlessly set up a parallel between the two main characters due to their upbringings and beliefs. Okarun seems to be more of a factual and information based character and seems invested into technology, whereas Momo seems to be more of an emotional and anecdotal person and retains some old traditions and traits due to her lineage. On the topic of the author, if the art style, interactions, or general feel of the manga seem familiar, it's because Yukinobu Tatsu was an assistant to the author of Chainsaw Man, Fire Punch, and the author of Hell's Paradise. He's worked on some really amazing series, and this is made evident the more that you read DanDaDan. The two decide to set up a wager between each other. If Momo can prove that spirits are real, then Okarun will be her gopher, and if Okarun can prove that UFOs are real, then Momo will serve as his gopher. It's because of this wager that we get a large amount of insight into the character of Momo. Despite what she's first shown to be, she seems like a very empathetic and selfless person because of what she went through during her childhood, and her reasoning for believing in spirits is made abundantly clear. And up to this point, the tone of the series has been relatively light-hearted and has felt like a slice of life manga, but it's when I saw the next few panels that I realised that this series was something else. And this is something I think this series does exceptionally well compared to others. Its ability to shift tones and mood so easily and quickly really does take you by surprise, and I'll explain further. Like I mentioned earlier, comedy is a very large aspect of the series, and going from light-hearted panels like this to panels that look like they genuinely belong in a horror manga just adds to its spontaneousness. I don't know if I'm about to get jump scared after seeing characters laugh, and it keeps me on edge while reading a lot of time, which not a lot of series are able to do. In terms of actual story and plot, it's nothing crazy, but that's integral to the pacing and flow of the entire series. Upon awakening their powers, they don't go out seeking vengeance or act out of a sense of justice, rather they're just high school students that adapt to the situations around them and defend themselves. The only real goal in the series at the moment is for the MC to get his balls back, and no, I will not be elaborating any further. The series isn't necessarily thought-provoking or have an insane amount of depth, but that's why it's so good at what it does. It's not overambitious with the storyline or its characters. Compared to series where authors do get overambitious, things begin to get extremely convoluted, and because of this, plot holes begin to appear, things start to not make any sense, character quality degenerates, and the series just gets harder and harder to follow. Tokyo Revengers is a perfect example of everything I just mentioned. The creativity of the series, as well as the fact that it doesn't tend to take itself too seriously or try too hard to create an insane story, allows it to have one of the most fluid plots I've ever seen. And because of the nature of the main cast, as well as general unpredictability, Tatsu is able to throw them into the most unorthodox situations. And it still makes sense narratively because not much makes sense, but in a good way. if that makes any sense. Take the early arcs as an example, racing an old woman that can travel at insane speeds, fighting off aliens invading in an underwater version of their school, and fighting a worm that tells people to kill themselves. The only key similarities that these situations have is that they're fighting aliens and spirits. Because of that, as long as the enemy fits the criteria of being either one of them, what the author does is fair game. And because of that, the series is very unpredictable. These arcs are also usually very key moments for character growth in terms of actual character and strength, and there's a clear sense of progression in terms of development after each arc. And because the cast of characters is so small compared to others in Shonen, it lets the author expand and focus on every individual character and their personalities. And this is evident through the way that the characters bounce off of each other so well. The antagonistic forces within the series are also done pretty nicely, and I think it's here where Tatsu's experience in working on Hell's Paradise truly comes through. Based on their appearances, we assume that these villains are past the point of redemption and are just plain evil. The yokai of this world bear similarities to the criminals of Hell's Paradise. Beneath everything, they still have emotions, and the negative stigma associated with them is undeserving in some cases. I'm not going to spoil anything, but we learn that some of the yokai have very valid reasons for doing what they do, and their reasonings turn out to be some of the most touching moments that the series has to offer. Because yokai are part of the main antagonistic force, they have a lot of ties and significance to the culture of Japanese folklore, and this has implications in the story. It prompts readers to look into the background of the yokai themselves, whether that be out of pure interest or try to predict what abilities or talents they have. I've said something along the lines of this in another video, but if a series manages to make you do external reading in relation to a certain philosophy or culture, then it's special. Character design is also something I think the series does exceptionally well. Like I said earlier, I do genuinely believe that this series has the potential to be absolutely massive. If you want something different, spontaneous, something that doesn't take itself too seriously, then DanDaDan is the perfect series for you. Hopefully you give the series a try, and if you do, be sure to leave your thoughts of it in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching and have a nice